When something feels off in a relationship, do you usually want to talk immediately, or do you want space? Most people don't need to think about that question very long. The answer feels instinctive. And that's exactly what made psychologists curious. Because two people can experience the same situation, the same silence, the same argument, the same emotional distance, and react in completely opposite ways. One wants closeness, the other wants distance. For decades, psychology tried to explain why. One of the most influential answers came from a deceptively simple idea that long before we learn to communicate with words, our brains learn something else instead. They learn what to expect from other people when we're stressed, scared, or overwhelmed. That idea became known as attachment theory. Today, attachment theory is everywhere. In therapy rooms, in dating advice, in online quizzes that promise to explain your love life in 3 questions. But attachment theory didn't start as a personality system or a relationship hack. It started as a serious scientific attempt to understand how humans learn safety. And the story of what happened next is a perfect example of how a powerful psychological idea can slowly turn into something that explains too much, too easily. To understand the promise of attachment theory, we need to go back to the beginning. A newborn cannot regulate their own emotions. They can't calm themselves down. They can't make sense of fear or discomfort. When a baby is distressed, their nervous system depends on another human being to settle it. Attachment theory proposed something radical for its time. Caregivers function as the child's external nervous system. When a caregiver responds consistently, the child's brain learns a basic rule. When I'm stressed, connection helps. When care is inconsistent, the brain learns something else. I need to increase my signals to get attention. When care is rejecting or unavailable, another rule forms. Needing others doesn't work. I should manage on my own. These aren't conscious thoughts, they're patterns. Patterns learned through repetition, long before memory or language. The promise of attachment theory was that these early patterns shape how people later deal with emotional closeness, conflict, and stress in relationships. Not because childhood determines destiny, but because the nervous system learns what works and keeps using it. This idea changed psychology. It replaced moral judgment with adaptation. It reframed difficult behavior as meaningful response. And it offered hope. If these patterns are learned in relationships, they can also be reshaped in relationships. Attachment theory promised understanding without blame and change without erasing the past. So why did researchers take this idea seriously? Because they could see it. In observational studies, psychologists noticed that when caregivers briefly left and then returned, infants reacted in surprisingly consistent ways. Some children were upset, but quickly calmed when comfort returned. Others barely reacted at all. Some became extremely distressed and struggled to settle even after reunion. These responses weren't random. Over time, they were grouped into broad categories. Secure, distress is temporary, comfort works. Avoidant, distress is minimized, closeness is avoided. Anxious, distress is amplified, reassurance never feels enough. Disorganized, comfort and fear come from the same person. Researchers found that these early patterns were linked to later emotional regulation, stress responses, and relationship expectations. Not perfect predictions, not life sentences, but meaningful patterns. Attachment theory also lined up with neuroscience. Early stress shapes how easily the nervous system activates and how hard it is to return to calm. And something else happened. People recognized the theory instantly. Parents saw it in children. Therapists saw it in clients. Adults saw it in themselves. Attachment theory didn't just feel scientific, it felt intuitively true. And when an idea feels both measurable and relatable, it gains momentum. A lot of momentum. That's where the trouble began. Attachment theory was originally about patterns in specific relationships under stress. But as it moved from research into therapy culture and popular psychology, Those patterns slowly turned into personal labels. Instead of saying, "This person tends to withdraw when they feel overwhelmed," the language became, "This person is avoidant." Descriptions hardened into identities. Attachment styles stopped being tools for understanding behavior and started becoming explanations for personality, relationships, and even character. Dating advice simplified everything into 4 types. Conflict became predictable. Breakups became diagnostic. Did someone pull away? Avoidant? Did someone want reassurance? Anxious? The problem isn't that these interpretations are always wrong. The problem is that they're often too clean. Research shows attachment patterns can vary across relationships and over time. Someone might feel secure with friends and anxious with partners. Withdraw during burnout. Open up after a supportive relationship. Context matters. Later experiences matter. Current stress matters. But simplified attachment language tends to ignore this complexity. And then something subtle happens. Parents start feeling judged. Clients start feeling fixed. Partners start diagnosing each other instead of listening. A theory meant to increase compassion quietly becomes a shortcut explanation, and shortcuts feel satisfying until reality stops fitting the model. So at this point, a reasonable question is this: is attachment theory actually useful at all? Here's the twist. The labels are the weakest part of attachment theory. The question behind them is the strongest. Not, what attachment style am I? But what do I do when I feel unsafe in a relationship? That question shifts the focus from identity to process, from labeling to understanding. And that's where attachment theory still has something important to offer. When attachment becomes identity, it shapes behavior. People stop experimenting. They stop expecting change. I'm avoidant becomes a reason to disengage. I'm anxious becomes a reason to tolerate too little or too much. In parenting culture, attachment language can quietly generate fear. Every decision feels loaded. Every moment feels permanent. And in clinical and policy contexts, attachment explanations sometimes overshadow structural factors like poverty, instability, and access to care. The irony is striking. Attachment theory was meant to highlight how environments shape people, but simplified versions can end up individualizing everything. So what actually remains valuable? First, attachment is best understood as learned strategies, not personality traits. These strategies are about regulation, not character. They're about what helped someone survive emotionally in a particular environment. Second, attachment patterns are flexible. They can shift with new experiences, therapy, and relationships that feel safer and more predictable. Third, and this is the core insight, attachment theory gives us a map of what happens under stress. When you feel safe, your thinking brain is online. You can reflect, communicate, compromise. When you feel unsafe, your nervous system takes over. Old strategies activate automatically. Some people pursue, some withdraw, some freeze, some escalate. Attachment theory helps explain why those reactions make sense without turning them into destiny. Used this way, attachment becomes a tool for curiosity rather than judgment. It helps people ask better questions instead of rushing to conclusions. Attachment theory began as a compassionate attempt to understand how humans learn safety. Its problem started when certainty replaced curiosity. And that pattern, a powerful idea becoming too confident, shows up again and again in the history of mental health science. If you want more research-based stories like this, about the theories that shape psychology, what they got right, and where they quietly went wrong, consider subscribing to The Uncertain Mind.